No one expected what unfolded on Tanya Tucker's tour bus that night. For decades, fans have swapped stories. Insiders have hinted at things they'll never fully explain. And a handful of people who were actually there still refuse to talk about it publicly. Tanya has lived through chaos, heartbreak, triumph, and controversy. But whatever happened inside that bus remains one of the most puzzling moments tied to her name. It wasn't a tabloid headline or a staged publicity stunt. This was something the people closest to her described as unnerving, unexpected, and not the kind of thing you joke about. But like so many stories in the music world, the details don't come from a single source. They come from fragments, from rumors that pop up every few years, from backstage whispers that never get recorded on camera, and from the tension you can feel when certain old interviews shift just slightly whenever that night is mentioned. And the more you look into it, the clearer it becomes that this wasn't just a random hiccup on tour or a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion. Something happened, something that left an impression deep enough that even today, fans still replay the story, trying to piece together the clues. Tanya, who has always been bold, fiery, and sometimes unfiltered, has brushed it off with vague comments, but never outright denied anything. And the silence around the topic is part of what makes it so intriguing. How could one night, one brief moment on a bus, leave behind such a long shadow? To understand the tension inside that bus, you have to step back a little, back to the days leading up to it, when pressure was mounting, nerves were stretched thin, and Tanya was carrying more weight on her shoulders than most people knew. Because whatever happened that night didn't just appear out of nowhere. It started forming long before the bus doors shut. People close to the tour later mentioned that Tanya had been dealing with a heavy emotional load. Not a meltdown or anything dramatic, just the kind of exhaustion that creeps in after months on the road. And even though she hid it well from the audience, her team noticed the cracks. She wasn't snapping at people or shutting herself off, but she seemed distracted, like parts of her mind were somewhere else. Some crew members quietly speculated that old pressures were resurfacing. Tanya had always been someone who carried her history with her, and during stressful times, it sometimes showed in subtle ways. Those small details didn't seem significant at first, but when they were recalled later, they added context people wished they had paid more attention to. Another factor was the atmosphere backstage. Members of the team had been experiencing their own disagreements. Nothing dramatic, but enough to cause tension. It made the environment heavier than usual. People rushed through tasks, conversations were shorter, and everyone seemed to be moving faster than they needed to. Tanya, always sensitive to the mood around her, picked up on it. She wasn't just dealing with her own pressure, she was absorbing everyone else's. By the time she walked out to perform that night, the strain had built into something noticeable, even if no one fully understood it. And when the show ended and the crew hurried toward the tour bus to prepare for the next long drive, that lingering tension followed them. They didn't know it at the time, but the atmosphere that had been tightening all week was about to come to a breaking point once the bus doors closed behind them. What made the night feel even stranger was the shift people noticed in Tanya's behavior earlier that evening. It wasn't anything chaotic, just subtle changes that didn't fit how she normally carried herself. She was restless, pacing more than usual, almost as if she was trying to shake off a feeling she couldn't explain. One makeup artist later recalled that Tanya kept glancing toward the hallway between touch-ups, like she'd heard something no one else noticed. Even fans waiting outside before the show mentioned something unusual. Normally, Tanya greeted crowds with a confident smile, but that night her attention kept drifting. Some said she looked over her shoulder more than once, as if checking for someone she expected but didn't see. At the time, everyone brushed it off as nerves or fatigue. After all, she'd been pushing herself for weeks. But when they thought back on it later, those moments felt more important. They were small clues leading toward a larger mystery. Inside the dressing room, one staff member claimed Tanya paused during a conversation and stared at the floor for a few seconds without speaking. When asked if she was okay, she simply nodded and said she was fine, though her expression suggested something else was on her mind. She wasn't panicked, just unsettled. The kind of feeling people get when something feels off, even if they can't identify what it is. Those around her chalked it up to pre-show jitters or the mental toll of constant travel. But as the evening unfolded, that undercurrent of unease didn't fade. In fact, it followed her all the way to the bus after the performance. And once she stepped inside, that quiet tension she'd been carrying seemed to cling to the air, setting the stage for the confusion that would soon erupt among the crew. When everyone boarded the tour bus after the show, the conflicting energy from earlier lingered in ways no one could quite describe. Some crew members insisted that the atmosphere was normal, people settling into seats, equipment being stowed, conversations starting up the way they always did. But others said something shifted as soon as the doors hissed shut. They described the space feeling heavier, quieter, almost charged. It wasn't fear exactly, but a strange stiffness no one could explain. The most interesting part is how drastically the stories differ. A few people said Tanya sat calmly near the front, barely speaking. Others claimed she seemed unusually alert, as though she was listening for something beyond the usual engine rumble and backstage chatter. One unverified story even suggests she raised her hand briefly, signaling for everyone to quiet down, without giving a reason. It was a tiny detail, yet it stuck with those who remembered it. Another version of events says the crew started noticing little noises that didn't match the usual movement of the bus. A thump, a soft shift, something brushing lightly against one of the back cabinets. Some thought it was just gear settling. Others weren't so sure. The conflicting accounts make it impossible to know exactly which version is closest to the truth. But the fact that so many details differ only deepens the mystery. What everyone agrees on, though, is that the tension grew. People spoke in shorter sentences. Glances darted around more frequently, and Tanya seemed caught between curiosity and unease. It wasn't dramatic enough to trigger panic, but it was enough that people still talk about it all these years later. And those little inconsistencies, those different memories, set the stage for the moment that would turn this quiet tension into outright alarm. Because just minutes later, the entire bus felt something no one could explain. The moment after the bus jolted became the part of the story people still whisper about, because Tanya Tucker's response wasn't what anyone expected from someone known for being fearless. For a brief second, she didn't say a word. She didn't stand up, didn't demand explanations, didn't joke to lighten the mood. She simply stared toward the back of the bus with an intensity the crew had rarely seen. It wasn't anger or confusion. It was something closer to alertness, like she was trying to determine if what she felt was real or if her instincts were playing tricks on her. Some people claim she slowly stood up after a few seconds, gripping the edge of the seat as though she wasn't sure what she was about to walk into. Others insist she whispered something under her breath, too low for anyone to understand. One of the crew members later said Tanya asked quietly, "Is someone back there?" Though that account hasn't been confirmed, it became one of the most repeated parts of the story. Not because of the words, but because of the idea behind them. The thought that Tanya Tucker bold as ever, might have sensed something the others hadn't, made everyone stiffen. A couple of crew members moved toward the back of the bus to check, but they stopped when Tanya raised her hand again, a small gesture, almost instinctive, telling them to hold on. She wasn't panicking, but she wasn't brushing things off either. It was as though she believed whatever caused the disruption wasn't over yet, and she didn't want anyone making sudden moves. What unsettled the group most was the stillness. Tanya's posture, her narrowed eyes, the way she seemed to be listening for something none of them could hear, it added a strange weight to the air. And once she finally sank back into her seat, she didn't crack a smile or offer reassurance. She stayed quiet, deep in thought, as if trying to connect the dots of something she couldn't quite explain. But that moment changed the tone inside the bus entirely. Because if Tanya was bothered, everyone else knew they should be too. And the most unsettling part is how sharply the story shifts after her reaction. Because from there, the people involved seem to split into two groups. Those who claim nothing strange happened, and those who clearly didn't want to talk about the night at all. What followed in the minutes after Tanya's reaction became almost more mysterious than the jolt itself. The crew, normally chatty after shows, fell into an awkward silence. People avoided eye contact, acted busy with bags that didn't need adjusting, and sat a little straighter than before. It wasn't fear, it was uncertainty, the type that makes people act cautious without fully understanding why. One of the strangest parts of this whole night is how differently the people involved handled it afterward. A few casually dismissed the moment when asked about it years later, insisting it was nothing but road vibration or nerves. They seemed genuinely unfazed, as if the whole incident had faded from memory. But others reacted differently, and those reactions are what fuel the mystery. When certain team members were asked in later interviews about weird moments on tour, they dodged the question entirely or said things like, "Some nights weren't meant for the public." The careful phrasing, the small smirk one person gave before changing the subject, the quick shift in tone, they didn't deny something happened. They simply refused to elaborate. And that silence said more than a confession ever could. A former crew member once mentioned in a backstage conversation that people saw what they saw, but not everyone wants to relive it. That vague comment has been quoted endlessly by fans, even though no one truly knows what he meant. Still, the fact that he avoided further explanation only deepened the intrigue. Some believe the silence was simply professionalism. Tour teams often keep private moments private. Others think the conflicting reactions suggest that not everyone experienced the moment the same way, which aligns with the earlier differing accounts. But the group who spoke the least, the ones who shrugged off questions, unintentionally made things more suspicious. Their refusal to explain what made the atmosphere so heavy after the disruption created a lasting divide between what happened and what the public would forever speculate about. And what came next would only amplify that speculation, because after the tour ended, an unexpected discovery was made. Weeks after the incident, when the bus was being cleaned and prepped for another run, something was found in one of the back compartments that sparked years of rumors. Accounts of what it was differed dramatically, but the fact that something turned up at all added fuel to the mystery. Some online discussions claim it was a small personal item that didn't belong to anyone on the crew, something that would have required someone to physically be on the bus to leave behind. Others believe it was an object that looked out of place, something usually not carried on tour buses at all. A few people insist the item was photographed before being removed, though no images have ever surfaced. The crew never confirmed what it was, which only made fans speculate more. And because it was found in a part of the bus near where Tanya had been staring during the incident, it created a narrative people couldn't ignore. Did someone get onto the bus unnoticed? Was the jolt connected to someone trying to board or leave? Or was it nothing more than an overlooked object that had been there for weeks? Without confirmation, the theories multiplied. Some said the item belonged to a previous tour member who'd left unexpectedly months earlier. Others believed it had to do with maintenance crews who boarded the bus occasionally. None of these explanations fully satisfied fans who'd been following the story. What made the discovery even more interesting was the reaction from those who heard about it. A few crew members brushed it off completely, claiming the item was irrelevant. But one insider reportedly shook his head and said, "That's when people started talking again," refusing to elaborate. Whatever was found, it became the final piece of the puzzle for fans. The moment that connected Tanya's behavior, the crew's silence, and the unexplained jolt into one long-standing mystery. And yet, even with all the speculation, the person whose opinion might matter most has remained almost entirely quiet on the issue. Not because she's hiding something, but because she understands that legends often grow bigger when left untouched.